and welcome to Crafts with Ash DIY and Decor. My name's Ashley and today I am going to be bringing you my top 21 DIYs of 2021. These were some of the most popular DIYs on my channel from this past year, fan favorites, and quite frankly, some of my favorites too. But first, before we get started, if you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that little notification bell so you're notified anytime I upload a video. Then hit the drop down menu and click all so you're notified about all notifications. I upload videos every Wednesday and Friday with a ton of fun and exciting content, and because I just moved into a new home, I'm going to have a variety of different videos coming at you soon. All right, well, sit back, relax, and let's jump into the top 21 DIYs of 2021. So to begin making this, I'm going to use a black glass bowl from the Dollar Tree, and I'm also going to be using this funnel. Now, it comes in a pack of 3, and I'm using the middle size funnel. So the first thing I had to do was I actually had to cut the funnel part off because I only needed the bigger part. So I hope that makes sense. So you can see that I'm just cutting it down. I did actually go to my saw and cut it down, and then I'm just now using my scissors to trim it up. What I want to do is I wanted to make the bowl a little bit higher so the broom part was higher. So I am just evening it all out. Was that even a word? And making it even, and I'm sanding it down. And then I'm going to use my super glue and hot glue to glue this on top of the bowl. And this is just going to add some height for when we go ahead and create the broom at the bottom. So again, I'm just going to use some hot glue and the super glue for that instant hold and permanent hold, and then attach the funnel to the top. Now, I did let it set for a little bit because you absolutely want to make sure that the glue is dry. So after that, I took this luau skirt and I purposely kept this skirt from summer because I knew I would be doing this DIY, but you can of course just use raffia. You don't have to have the skirt. So all I'm doing is just hot gluing it around the top of the funnel part. Now you can see that it's long, so what I'm going to do is cut it down and just keep wrapping it around to make layers, because you can see kind of to the left there's a big hole there. It kind of looks like it was cut at some point. So I'm just going to do this until I feel like the broom part is full enough. So I'm just going to go around and around and make sure that, you know, it's all covered. Okay, so now this is where I say I'm going to raise it up, and now I'm going to go ahead and just chop, chop, chop. Now the length that I'm going to is the bottom of the bowl. So I'm just going to take my scissors and just give it a haircut. We kind of have like a Cousin It situation going on here. So we're going to make this look more like a broom. Up, and now I'm just going to go through and hot glue it to those bare spots. Now, as you can see, I did leave the top of the funnel open because that's what we're going to glue our plate on top of. So just like here, I'm just going through, taking pieces of raffia and just filling in any holes. Okay, so once I had my entire bowl covered with the raffia, I am just taking a baby wipe, dipping it in some Waverly antique wax, and basically just brushing it on. Again, I'm going to use my hot glue and super glue and put that square right on top. Now, so it would blend in, I did go in with some black acrylic paint, and I'm going to paint around the edges of the square, and then I'm going to paint the bottom. So I did, but first I reinforced it by going around the bottom and putting more hot glue. And then as you saw, I did hold it there for, you know, quite a while until the glue set up. You really want to make sure it's dry. So now, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and paint the edges. You don't have to paint the top. I just use that as a palette and to put the paint on. So I just painted around the edges and at the bottom. Now I'm going to use my hot glue and super glue and glue down this plate. There we go. Okay, now again, I am pushing down on it to make sure that it is fully adhered. So I do hold it for several minutes. Now, to give it more weight, I added some paint bottles, and these were pretty full paint bottles, and I'm just going to add those on top to, weigh it down so the glue will set. Okay, so next I took this dowel rod, and my dad had given this to me, but you can use a plunger stick and do the same exact thing. So what I needed to do first was find out how tall I wanted that first tier to be. And I decided that I actually liked the length of the bottle. So what I'm doing right now is measuring the length of the bottle just like that, because I liked the height of that. So then I took it to my miter saw and I cut it down. And now again, by using hot glue and super glue, I'm going to glue this to the middle. Now here's the thing you really want to watch, because I actually had to take this off and do it again. I don't know if I show it, but I did. You want to make sure that this stick right here is in the middle of the broom so it looks like it's all one piece. So now once that's on, I'm going to add my bottles again and weigh it down. And now I'm going to put hot glue and super glue on the top of that stick, put my plate on, and again, you want to make sure that this top stick is even with the bottom stick and the broom. I hope that's making sense. So right now I just put my bottle on top to weigh it down. So with that other part of the dowel rod, I actually cut it at a 45-degree angle, because if you look at the original, that's how it's cut. But then when I cut it off, it exposed a lighter wood. So after I sanded it down, I'm just taking my Waverly Antique Wax and I'm just staining it, and it ended up being the same color. So if you do use the plunger stick, do the same thing. Dip a baby wipe into the Waverly Antique Wax and stain your stick if you want it a little darker. After that, I added some super glue and hot glue to the top of that plate, and again I'm going to add something to the top to weigh it down, and I let this set completely overnight. Again, I took this round sign that I got from the Dollar Tree and I flipped it over and took off the sticker on the back by using my hair dryer and my little scraper. After that, I gave this a really good coat of Waverly chalk paint in white. Once my paint was dry, I took this ruler that I always say I purposely bought because it's the perfect width for Faux Shiplap, and I started in the middle and just started drawing lines to make it look like Faux Shiplap. So I just did this until my entire sign was covered with all of these lines. Then to make it all blend, I used my finger and went over all of the lines to kind of smudge it so that way it looked more realistic. Then after I did that, I took my brush that had the Waverly chalk paint on it. I did not re-dip it. I just used whatever was on the brush and just went over the lines to dull it down just a little bit. So to make the popsicles, I'm going to be using these dominoes just like Whitney did over on her garland, her Patriotic popsicle garland. So I counted out 6 because I'm going to be spelling out summer. And what I did was I just kind of measured down a little bit so I can cut off the bottoms to give it more of that popsicle shape. So once I cut one down, I use that as a template to cut down all of the rest. After they were all cut down, I used that sanding block and sanded the edges, that way they were nice and smooth. after they were all sanded down, it was time to paint. So I started off by using this pink Parfait apple barrel paint, and I painted one of them with that. And I'm going to quickly go through this. You can use whatever colors you want. You can even do red, white, and blue and make it a patriotic sign. The possibilities are really endless with this. Then for the second one, I used bright yellow from apple barrel. Then for the third one, I just used some orange acrylic paint. I was really trying to go for bright colors. I really wanted the sign to be very summery and fun. Then for my fourth popsicle, I used a lime green paint. And you can also just use whatever is in your stash. For my fifth little popsicle, I used a turquoise blue paint. And don't forget, you also want to paint the edges and the bottoms of all of your popsicles too. Then for my last little popsicle, I used a purple paint. So then once I had all of my popsicles painted and they were dry, it was time to apply the letters. Now for this, I used this stencil that I got from the Dollar Tree, and by using my black acrylic paint and a makeup sponge, I spelled out summer, putting one letter on each of the little popsicles. Now, something I did to make sure that all of my letters were lined up was I kept comparing it to the one that I did before. That way, they were all even. Now to clean up the edges of my letters, I did go in with a black Sharpie and just kind of traced around it. Once all my popsicles had the letters on, it was time to add the little popsicle sticks. Now I happen to have these skinny popsicles that I just had in my stash. My mother-in-law actually gave them to me, so I'm not quite sure where they came from. But all I did was cut 3 of them in half. Then I hot glued them to the back of my popsicle. Then by using that as a template, I went ahead and hot glued the rest of them on the popsicles as well. But you want to make sure that all of your sticks are even and lined up at the bottom. After I had those all glued down, I lined them up on my little board. Now I did not hot glue them down at this point. Next, I took these big black letters that I got from the Dollar Tree and I spelled out hello right on top. Now I realized as I was doing this that I did not have an H, so I just used 2 eyes and then cut down a little piece for the center. So after I had all my letters down, I made sure that they were all even, and I actually just put the bottom on one of my little shiplap lines. And then after that, I pushed them down once I knew that they were where they needed to be. Next, I went ahead and I hot glued all of my little popsicles down. Now to do this, I actually ended up using super glue and hot glue because this is going to be on my sister's front door and I don't want the sun to melt the hot glue. So I would definitely recommend putting E6000 or that fix-all glue or some kind of glue other than hot glue to hold these down. After that, to protect my letters and my paint, I put a coat of Mod Podge over the entire thing. While that was drying, it was time to make a bow. So the bow I'm going to make is called a messy bow, and actually also a refabbed bow, and I got this idea from Brooke over at Refabbed. Now she is more present on Facebook, so you definitely want to check her out. She has a great bow tutorial. I am not great at bows, so I am not going to spend a lot of time on this, but basically all you want to do is cut off strips of ribbon that you want to use, and then you're going to put them in an X. Now I ended up after this finding brighter ribbon at the Dollar Tree, so in the picture you're going to see different types of ribbon, but this is basically all you do. You just lay them out in an X and you just kind of mix and match and mix them up. And then after that I took some twine to put in the middle and gather it all together. After that, I took the pieces of twine that were left over and I looped them through the hole and I pulled it really tight. Then I'm going to use my scissors to go ahead and cut all of these ribbons down and make them look all proportional. After that, I brought it through and I hot glued it to the back, and I used one of my leftover pieces of ribbon to put down for extra support. Then at the top of my extra twine, I tied a knot, and that's going to be the hanger for our little sign. What do you think? DIY, I grabbed this Easter sign that I had left over and I plucked off the little feet and the raffia bow and the eyes on the back, and then I flipped it over and gave it kind of a messy coat of ivory chalk paint. So I wasn't going for full coverage here, but I wanted it to be mostly covered, but if you can see some of the board underneath, that was okay too. Next, I took 3 of these metal flowers from the Dollar Tree and I took off the little hangers and the bells on each one of them. Then I'm going to dry brush that ivory chalk paint over each one of these flowers. I really loved the look that this gave because it dulled down the bright colors, but it still was colorful. So it was a good mix of rustic farmhouse, but fun as well. To distress my flowers, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and my distressing brush, and I just lightly brushed it over each one of the petals. Now, if you don't like pieces distressed or you don't like that antique rustic look, you can absolutely skip this step. That's the beauty of DIYing, because you do it yourself, and that way you create it how you like it. After my flowers were finished, I took my board again after it had dried, and I took that ruler and stuck it right in the middle of the board and traced lines on either side. That way it give it that shiplap look. Then again, I took my finger and rubbed over the pencil. That way it blended it all in. Next, I decided to distress this too, so I took my Waverly Antique Wax and that brush, and I did the same thing I did to the flowers. I just dry brushed over my sign. Now, I did pay attention to the edges and the sides because I do want those to be a little darker, but after I did that, I sanded it all down to make it all blend in. Next, I took these 3 frames that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I first started off by ripping the little stands off the back, and then I am going to take the clip off of the front, and I did this to all 3 of those frames. Now before I glued anything down, I decided that I wanted to make the frames a little darker. I just thought that it would help make the flowers pop more, so I just dry brushed over the edges of my frame with the Waverly Antique Wax. So as I was looking at my flowers, I just felt like it needed something, another little detail. So what I decided to do was to take some twine and hot glue twine in the middle of each one of my flowers. So I started in the middle, added a little hot glue, and then I just rolled it around each other until the entire middle section was covered. And again, I did this to all 3 of my flowers. Then to make that look a little bit more rustic, I just simply took some antique wax and dabbed it in the middle on top of the twine. Next, I brought my board back and I am going to hot glue the picture frames on the board. Now you want to make sure to put a good amount of hot glue so that way they stay on top. Now, in order to help make my flowers stick on to the frames, I had to put some craft sticks in the middle because there is a dip in the middle. So I wanted to hot glue those on to give it more surface to be glued. Now, I'm going to highly recommend that you add super glue to the sticks and to the metal because metal and hot glue do not mix, and I did have to fix this a couple times because I only hot glued it. So if you add super glue to all of anything that's touching metal, then you probably could prevent it from falling apart. So then I just hot glued one flower to each one of my frames. Next, I took some twine and I wrapped it a bunch of times around the top and the bottom. Then after that, the sign was complete, and like I said, I just absolutely love the colors in this sign. I kind of think it kind of gives off a shabby chic vibe as well, but it is just so pretty, and I got a lot of really amazing compliments on this one too. So I hope you really love it as well. For my next DIY, I absolutely loved this on my mom's back deck, and I made a towel holder. So what I did was grab this sign I had left over from Easter, and then I gave it one good coat of white Waverly chalk paint. After that was dry, I took that ruler again, and you guessed it, I drew on some shiplap lines. Now, instead of using a pencil this time, I used a Sharpie marker, and this Sharpie marker is actually kind of going dry, so it's not that bold. Now, I know my lines are not even. That's my bad. I don't know what I was doing there. Next, I took my sanding block and I sanded it down, and then I brushed over it with my paintbrush just to blend everything together. After that, I decided I wanted to dry brush some bright colors all over my board. So I took a chippy brush and I dipped it in some orange paint, and then I'm going to go over with some pink paint, and I'm just kind of mixing up the colors until I get it to how I like. After that was dry, I took this pack of Sandal coasters, and it's a 4-pack, and I laid them each out across the board. Now, I really wanted this sign to be very colorful, as you can see, but if you just want it to be neutral or you want it to be a different color, you can always paint the foam to any color you like. Now, to glue this down, I used some super glue and hot glue because this is going outside, and again, we don't want the sun to melt the hot glue. So you're gonna have to use E6000, or I'm using the Fix All glue. But I just went ahead and I glued these all down. After they were glued down, I put that off to the side. I took a piece of painter's tape and I taped it upside down so the sticky part was on top. Next, I put these clear command hooks across the tape that I got from the Dollar Tree. That way it holds it while I paint these. I painted one with a bright pink color. I painted another with a green color. I painted the third one with a blue color, and then I painted the fourth one in yellow. And I gave each of these 2 coats of the paint. After they were dry, I laid them out on my sandals and I just kind of mixed up the colors so that way the same color hook wasn't with the same color sandal, if that makes sense. And again, by using the super glue and the hot glue, I'm going to glue these hooks down on each of the sandals. Then, to protect the paint on all of my hooks, I went ahead and coated them with some Mod Podge. Now, I wanted to dress up my sandals a little bit to give them a little bit more detail. So I just took the back of a paintbrush and dipped it in some paint and made some polka dots on my sandals. And then you're going to see that I actually hot glued some buttons to the middle of the flowers. You can decorate these however you want, and that way that you get the look that you love. Then I decided I wanted to add a little bit more color, so I took the pink and the orange again and just dry brushed over my sign. I really love how this came out. It's been on my mom's back deck for about almost a month now, and it's still holding up strong. So we love it to display all the towels and to hang them up to dry, and it's perfect. DIY, I picked up this dollhouse from the Dollar Tree, and you've probably seen a lot of people do this. So I really wanted to make this into a haunted house, but I kind of did it with a twist. So what I did first was I popped out all of the windows, the door frames, all of those little pieces, and then I'm just going to take my black acrylic paint and paint this entire thing with that. Now, it is plastic, so it was kind of like slippery, if that makes sense, to paint this. So you do have to be careful, but you also should probably put a couple coats if you're using acrylic paint. Now, or you could just spray paint it and it would be a lot faster and cover so much better. But I just went ahead and painted this with the black acrylic paint. After that, I took these little pieces that had popped out, and for these white pieces, I'm actually just dry brushing the black over it. I'm not painting them black completely. So for like the little window frames, the door frames, and then for the green windows, I am actually going to paint those a solid black. But it's funny, I actually don't end up using those little windows that I'm painting now. But like I said, for the green ones, I did want those to be solid. So I'm just going to go through and paint up all of my little accessories. So after all of my little pieces were painted, I did go ahead and pop them back in. Now you can see at this point I did not paint the inside of the house. I do go back and paint that entire inside because I realized you would be able to see it. So I did go back and do that. But I'm just going to go ahead and pop all of my little pieces in, and obviously I realized it split into two, so it was easier for me to pop them in. Now, at this point I did put those two little windows in, but you're going to see in a little bit that I end up taking them off to do something a little bit more spookier. Now, after I got my pieces in, I did go ahead and slide the roof back on. And then I'm going to pop that last little window in on this side. It was funny because I actually kept having to hide this little house from my daughter. I bought it a while ago and because she wanted to play with it. So finally I just went out and bought her one because she kept stealing it from me. Okay, so then to add a little bit of texture and dimension, I took my silver metallic paint and I just kind of painted over everything. I'm just dry brushing over it. I really do feel that that silver metallic paint really adds a lot to the look. So I love putting this paint on Halloween projects because I don't know, I just feel like it adds that spooky touch. So for the two front windows at the bottom, I actually popped them out. And now I'm going to go through again and just kind of dry brush more of that silver metallic paint over. And I actually got this paint from Walmart in the craft section. And I tell you what, it comes in handy a lot. Especially if you've seen me galvanize things, I use this a lot. Because it, you know, kind of has that metal. Well, it's metallic. So I'm just going to continue to dry brush all the way around my house. Okay, so next I took a mini craft stick and I am just breaking it apart, and I really want like the rigid edges. I want it to look like it's broken wood. So I'm going to take two of them and break them in half, but I'm not using like the rounded parts at the end. And then I'm going to put them at a crisscross angle on each one of the windows. Now, if I had to cut one down, I did use my scissors, but you're going to see that I actually kind of go back and forth and kind of do like, I don't know how to, like X pattern or like a V pattern. And then once I had all of my little pieces cut, I'm going to go through and I'm going to paint that with brown paint. I'm going to kind of make it look like the windows were boarded up. So you can see I am, roughing up the edges a little bit. So now I'm just going to use my nutmeg paint, and I'm just going to paint each one of these. So then after I painted them with the brown paint, I actually dry brushed some black paint over each one of them, and to kind of make it look like it was dirty and old and gross. So then I just simply hot glued these onto the windows to make it look like they were boarded up, and I did glue them like at an X, and I really loved how that came out. And there we go. Okay, so to add one more little touch, I took a little bat sticker and I just hot glued that to the top of one of those windows on the roof. And there we go. Now our house is done. Next, I took this $4 bat wreath that I got from Five Below. And you could make this too, but I figured for $4, I would probably spend that much trying to put this together. So I thought that this would actually be the better deal and save me some time. So now I want to figure out a way to attach my house to the inside of that wreath. So what I ended up doing was using those black small zip ties and zip tying two of the ties together, and then I'm actually going to put it through the side windows underneath my wreath and attach it, and this worked out perfect. I love the way that this wreath came out. It was so cool. So I did that on both sides, and it really did hold these down, or hold the house down. So I'm just going to attach two zip ties together and then put it through the window on the other side, wrap it underneath, and then just pull really tight. And then I did go through and I cut off the excess zip tie And then I took this perfect little sign that came in a 2-pack from the Dollar Tree that says, "Welcome to our haunted home." And I'm going to dry brush a little bit of black paint around the edges just to make it look a little bit more spooky. So then I'm going to take my wire cutters and I'm actually going to cut the wire in the middle, just like that, and that's how I'm going to attach it to the top of this wreath. So there was a bat there, so I did end up pulling it off. These are just really easy. They just pull right off. And then I just wire them on. I just twist the wire around and around, and that's how I attached that sign. Now, after I had the sign attached, I kind of adjusted it a little bit so it didn't hang so far down, but it kind of was over the top. See, I just pushed it up a little bit. And then I just kind of reinforced it with some hot glue. All right, to add a little bit more, I'm going to take these purple flowers that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to hot glue one on either side of my haunted house. And these are the ones that had the eyeballs in it, I think. Maybe not all of them had the eyeballs because I don't see any eyeballs on those, but, or maybe they did and I took them out, I don't remember. And then to add even more, I'm going to take these purple branches and I'm basically just going to stick them in my wreath following like on either side. I don't know how to explain this. Maybe just watching it would be better. But real quick, I want you to look at the door of my haunted house and look up, and you see that little skeleton head there? That was in the middle of that purple bow that I hot glued on our ghost in the first DIY. So I wanted you to know where that came from. So I'm just kind of sticking in my little purple branches all the way around. And I'm adjusting my bats as I go too. And then I'm going to stick 2 on the bottom, kind of sticking out. And now I thought that this one should light up too. So I took another strand from the Dollar Tree and I'm just going to simply just push all the lights in there. Now I am going to go in with some tape. And I'm going to tape down the areas where the lights need to stick. Now I am making sure too to put a little light bulb or whatever next to the windows. Now I can't say that this is very bright because there's not a big opening, but I do think that it gives off enough light. Then again, I am going to go through and hot glue my battery pack down. And you can see that I did go ahead and paint the pink part on the dollhouse. I didn't worry about the purple because you couldn't really see that, but you could definitely see the pink. So now I'm just taping down my lights where I want them to go. And I'm kind of just arranging them, like I said, so a light would be near a window. So at least you would see a little bit of light come through there. But I absolutely loved how this wreath came out. I love the purple and black for Halloween. I just think it's so neat and spooky, but like, I don't know. I just think that it's elegant too. I think there's like something elegant about it. But after my lights were in, that was all to this wreath and I love it. What do you think? For my first DIY, I decided that I was going to make some sparklers or some fireworks. So I saw a lot of crafters do a lot of different ideas, but I really wanted to come up with my own. So when I saw these little finger shooters at the Dollar Tree, I picked up 2 packs, although you could probably get away with just using 1. So I went ahead and took them out of their packaging, and then I pulled off the little yellow things hanging off. Next, I took 3 of them, and I'm only going to be using 3, and I kind of just measured 3 different lengths and 3 different sizes. Then by using this little knife, I simply cut them down, and this was so easy to cut. Once I had them all cut down to the right size, I gave them all a coat of Waverly chalk paint in white. After they were all dry, I took the tallest one and I painted that with red paint. Now here I am using acrylic paint, but later on in the video I actually switched to crimson, which is a Waverly chalk paint, and I'm gonna show you why in a little bit. Then I took my medium-sized firework and I painted that with my Ocean Waverly chalk paint, and then I kept the smallest one in just the white. After that, I went ahead and used my hot glue to glue them all together. I put the tallest and the medium in the back and then the smallest in the front. After the glue was dry, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and I brushed over all of my fireworks. Now for this 4th of July season, I am going for Rustic Americana, so I'm going to distress all of my pieces. If you don't like that look, you can absolutely skip this stuff. You definitely don't have to do it. After that, I took my blue, white, and red twine and I wrapped it around the middle of my fireworks, cut it off, and then tied a knot. Next, I took these foam stickers that I got from the Dollar Tree and I put a blue star on each of the ends of my twine. For the tops of my fireworks, I actually had this wire left over from a project that I did, and it's kind of like wrapped in paper. So I just cut them down and used my needle nose pliers to flip the top under to make it kind of wound. And then I made sure to put 2 stems in each firework, and I made one taller than the other. And I did use hot glue to tack them in. Then to finish this off, I used a makeup sponge and my Waverly Antique Wax and just dabbed it right over the wire because I wanted them to look rustic as well. I love how these little fireworks came out. I think that it was so creative and also so simple and probably would only cost you $1. For my next DIY, this was also a very popular one on that 4 Ideas for Metal Flowers video, and this is the little sunflower stand that we're going to make. So at first I started off with 3 of these metal flowers, and I took the bells off of each of them and the hangers. Next, on all of the flowers, I am going to do the same thing, but I'm only going to show you on one. So I took some yellow acrylic paint and I painted all of the petals on all of the flowers. Now I found it easiest to paint these by lifting up all of the petals and give each layer of petals a few coats, and then once that was done, go ahead and unfold the second layer, give those a bunch of layers or coats, and then unfold the top one, and etc. So I just do think it is so much easier to do it layer by layer, and I gave each of these flowers probably 3 coats of yellow paint. Now for the top layer of petals, the smallest layer, I decided to actually paint that with my chocolate brown apple barrel acrylic paint. Now because you could see it underneath, I did hit the underneath part of the first layer. I hope you can see what I mean, because obviously you can see through. So then I gave this about 2 or 3 coats of that brown paint, and again I did this on all 3 of my flowers. After my brown layer of paint was on, I mixed in some black because I just wanted it to be a little darker. And then I just kind of dabbed that paint mixture all on the inside. I think that adding the black to that brown really helped to darken it, and I really like the color that ended up coming out. After that, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and a distressing brush, and I'm just dry brushing and distressing the yellow parts of my flower. Now, to add a little detail to the center of my sunflower, I decided to cut up this little piece of burlap and hot glue it to the circle part to kind of mimic or look like the seeds of a sunflower. So I just cut it in the shape of a circle, I frayed it, and then I hot glued it down. Then to darken it up and help it all blend in, I took that Waverly Antique Wax and just dabbed that on top of my burlap. After that, it was time to add my dowel rods so we can stick this into a planter. But first, I had to create something that the dowel rod could actually stick to, because remember from the first time, these are concave in the middle, so there's a dip. So what I did was hot glue a popsicle stick over that caved in part, and then I painted it black, and then I hot glued a dowel rod onto the stick. Now, again, I did not do this, and I learned the hard way. You're going to want to use super glue and hot glue to glue that popsicle stick down. I had these falling off, and now I know anytime I work with metal, I need to use something along with hot glue, like a super glue. So after I put the dowel rod on, I went ahead and painted that black, and I did this to all 3 flowers. After I was done with that, I took one of these little metal planters and I stuck a big piece of foam in the middle. Then I kind of stuffed Dollar Tree bags, and you all know I have a ton of those, in around the foam to just kind of fill those holes so the foam wouldn't move. So I wanted to build it up a little bit. Next, I took my flowers and I stuck them in my foam. I put one in the back middle, and that one was the highest, and then I put 2 in the front, and those were different heights. You'll see here in a little bit. Again, my angles are going to be weird because this was just really high on my table and my camera angle was not the best. Now for the flowers in the front, I did have to cut down the sticks just a little bit to get the height that I was going for. Next, I put some hot glue on the foam, and then I added some moss so I could hide the foam and the plastic bags. I really love how this came out. I actually gave it to my sister because she absolutely loves sunflowers and anything sunflower, and so it fits perfectly into her home. Now this one, like I said, was a very popular one in that video, and I can link these videos to the end of this video or in my description box. So if you want to see the other ideas for these metal flowers, you can catch those in that video. But like I said, I thought this was so pretty. This would actually be perfect to make now for the fall, so I hope you love it. For my next DIY, I'm going to start off with this sign that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I really loved it because of the shiplap shape that it has. So of course I started off by taking my hair dryer and scraping that tag off, and 100 years later, after I finally got it off, I sanded it down. That way the surface was nice and smooth for me to paint. Now before I did paint this, I did throw a little spackling in that hole and then sanded it down. And then I gave this a really good coat of plaster Waverly chalk paint. After my paint was dry, I took my ruler and a pencil, and basically I'm just lining up where those grooves are already, and I'm just going to draw lines all the way up my board. And again, like I said, I'm just using the grooves that are already there and basically attaching them. After I have all my lines drawn, I'm going to take my finger and run it over the pencil line to smudge it, and now this really looks like shiplap. Next, I took my chippy brush and that Waverly Antique Wax, and I distressed the entire sign. Then to help all of my paint blend together, I sanded over it, and then I took my brush that the plaster paint was on. I did not dip it in new paint, I just used whatever was on the brush, and I just brushed over the Waverly Wax just to kind of dull it down, but help it blend all together. So for this project, I'll be using the metal truck that came from the Dollar Tree. And to start off with, I'm going to take a makeup sponge and that Waverly Antique Wax and just kind of go around the edges, a little bit on the inside, and just random spots of that truck to give it that rusty look. Next, I'm going to take 2 of the smaller little craft sticks, and I'm going to measure it down so it fits nicely on the bed of the truck. And then I'm going to cut down 2 other little pieces, and we're going to put it all together. So what I did was layer the longer sticks on top of each other and just provide a little gap in the center, and then I took those smaller pieces and I used those to connect the 2 longer pieces. So you'll see here, all I did was use hot glue for this, but dummy me forgot to measure the size of the smaller popsicle sticks. You can see that it's hanging off the bottom, so I just simply cut it off with my scissors. So I put one on one side, and then I'm going to put one on the other side. Now my original plan was to stain this little piece with the Waverly Antique Wax, but I really liked the natural wood, so I just decided to dry brush the Waverly Wax over it. And then after that, I took that super glue and hot glue and glued the bottom of it to the top of the truck. Now I purposely positioned it so it hid that hole on that side too. There is a hole on the other side, but I had no idea how to cover that. If you have some ideas for me on how to do that, let me know, because I would like to cover that. I just didn't think that wood filler and stuff would work. So next, I did want this to kind of sit up a little bit on my sign. So I took these tumbling tower blocks, and again, by using that fix-all glue and the hot glue, I'm going to glue these down. Now, originally I started off and I just put one over each tire, but I do end up adding one over the window as well. So now at this point, I couldn't decide if I wanted this sign to go long ways like that or horizontal, or if I wanted it to go vertical. But either way, I knew that I wanted to use these amazing solo wood flowers. They sent me these flowers and asked me to use them in a DIY and to review them, and my review is 100% recommend. I absolutely love these. There's going to be a link in my description box below for these flowers. They are, believe it or not, made of wood, but they are so soft. They are easy to work with, and you can see that I'm kind of manipulating them and squishing them together and positioning them how I like, and they are beautiful. The neat thing is that you could even get a package of plain white ones or beige ones, and you can dye them yourself. So you can make them whatever color you need. So I absolutely love these solo wood flowers. They are so pretty. There's a variety of different themes and colors and packages that you can get, and like I said, I 100% recommend. Please don't forget to check out the link in the description box below. But you're gonna see that they made this DIY just so beautiful, and it made it pop. After I had all of my flowers glued down, I went ahead and glued down the truck. Next, I grabbed the Scrabble letters and spelled out Home Sweet Home. Now, it did take me a hot second to figure out how I wanted to position these letters, but finally, after I had them laid out how I liked, I just used some hot glue to glue them down. Then to give those a little rustic touch, I grabbed my chippy brush and my Waverly Antique Wax and dry brushed over the Scrabble letters. Then I decided I wanted the edges a little bit darker, so I hit those as well. Now there are no holes up top, so for the hanger, I took a piece of twine. I'm going to tie 3 knots on top of each other, and then I'm going to hot glue it to the front of my sign. Now before I hot glue the other end down, I'm going to add 6 20mm wooden beads to my hanger, and then to finish it off, I again am going to tie 3 knots on top of each other and then hot glue that to the front, and that completed the hanger. I also did brush over it a little bit with the Waverly Antique Wax, that way they weren't so stark wood, and it kind of gave that the rustic touch as well. I really love how this sign came out. It is so pretty, and this is definitely my second favorite one in this whole video, and it was a fan favorite in that original video as well. It's just so great, and I reluctantly gave it to my sister for her birthday because she loved it. So unfortunately I had to part with it, but I still love it. For this next DIY, I'm going to be using this box wood sign from the Dollar Tree. Now this one came from Easter, but they have these all year round. And then I picked up this super cute Mother's Day card. Now this is the one that's in the plastic, so it was not where all the cards are. It was like in its own little display. But I took it out of the plastic, and then I ripped the middle section out and then cut the card in half, so I was only left with the front of the card. Now, I didn't mention this before, but I did go ahead and sand off the glitter that was on the front of that sign too. Next, they have this little picket fence on there, and it is just held on by little 3D stickers. So I went ahead and popped that off. Now keep it close. We will use that again. But first, I went ahead and gave this entire sign one coat of Waverly chalk paint in white. I did the front, although you don't have to paint the entire front because we're going to be covering it, but just around the edges. And then I also painted the sides as well. Next, I went ahead and I hot glued my card in the middle of the sign. Now, the width is not big enough. Like, you can see that there's the white part of the box sticking out, and then the card is actually too long. So what I did was I just figured out where the center was, and then I folded it at the top and folded it at the bottom, and then I cut off the rest. Now, at first I started using my scissors, and then I realized it was much simpler to get that little craft knife again and just use that. Then I believe I also sanded down the top and the bottom just to make it that nice clean cut. Next, I went ahead and hot glued that little picket fence back on. Now, the reason why I took it off was because I had to cut the bottom of the card off. So this time when I glued it, the picket fence was just going to be a little higher up on the card. Next, I decided I was going to distress it. Now, again, if the person you're giving it to does not like that distressed look, you don't have to do this. But I took my Waverly Antique Wax and that makeup sponge and just lightly brushed over the edges. And then I also hit the little picket fence too. And I really love the look that gave. So next I took these little circular puff stickers that came from the Crafter's Square, and I went ahead and put them on all of the sides except for the bottom. Now, I'm not measuring here. I just kind of eyeballed it and just laid them out as evenly as I could in the middle of each of the sides. After they were all down and secure, I went ahead and painted over them with that white Waverly chalk paint. Now, I did not feel the need to hot glue these down because they are stickers, so they were actually pretty strong and they haven't come off yet. So I just went ahead and just used the sticker itself. So then, like I said, I painted over it. Now you want to make sure to paint around the entire circle sticker. That way you don't really see any of the color poking through. And I did this on all three sides. After that dried, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and I brushed it over the top, and the look and the texture that that gave was so neat. I really loved that little detail. Now, this sign came with a hanger on the back, and I chose to leave it on because it could either be hung or it could sit up, but I absolutely love how this came out. It has bright colors, yet it is rustic, and I just feel it is perfect for Mother's Day. What do you think? So to begin, we are going to start by making the crate. So what you're going to need are 9 of these little crates from the Dollar Tree. And the first thing I did was set them up so it was 3 by 3. Then by taking the wood glue that I actually got from the Dollar Tree, it's the first time I ever tried it, and I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed. It's holding up pretty well. But I did a combination of that wood glue and hot glue to glue them all together. Now, of course, because these are from the Dollar Tree, they're not going to fit perfectly because they are not cut perfectly. But that's okay, it just added to the little rustic touch. Then, to hold all of my crates together while the glue set, I took these little clamps that I got from the Dollar Tree and put them in between each of the crates. I gotta say, these are pretty cool for only being $1. They're small, but they are very strong and tight, so they're definitely holding all these crates together while the glue sets. After all the glue dried, I went ahead and removed the clamps, and then it was time to stain the entire thing. So to do this, I took a baby wipe and just dipped it in my Waverly Antique Wax and just rubbed it over the entire crate. Now, I will show you that I actually jumped to a different method to paint the inside, because of course it was hard to get in all the little corners and edges on the insides of the crates with the baby wipe. So in a minute I'll show you what I did, but I just made sure to basically stain this entire thing. Now of course you can use wood stain if you like. I just really love the color of Waverly Antique Wax, so I just stuck with that. Alright, so to do the insides, I took a foam brush and I dipped it in some water, and then I dipped it in the antique wax, and then that's how I stain the insides. Now you don't want to forget to get the little holes there too, and that way the entire thing is stained. Now this did take a little bit of time, but it was of course super easy, and it definitely pays off in the end. So after it was stained, I just went over it just a little bit with the baby wipe just to kind of wipe down any of the darker part, and then I took a sand block that I got from the Dollar Tree and just sanded over the entire thing to kind of rough it up, but also bring out that natural wood that's underneath. Now when I started sanding the insides of the crates, you'll see I'm actually sanding against the grain. And then I actually moved to a brand new sand block, and that way it's rougher and it really roughs up the insides. But the reason why I sanded the inside of the crate against the grain is because you can see these sand lines, and I really liked it because it looked like it was aged and this was really old, which is exactly the look I was going for. Next up, I took this picture that I got from the Dollar Tree and I unwrapped it from its plastic and took the hanger off the back, and then I'm going to remove the backing. Now, I really wanted to add some antique wax to this as well, but this frame is like a slippery plasticky, it's not wood. I don't think, for sure. So I needed to sand it down first. So then I went ahead and added the antique wax after I sanded it down, and it seemed to really help. And I used a baby wipe to apply it. After my frame was stained, I took the backing of that picture and I used my hairdryer to melt the hot glue that was holding it together, and then I used my scraper to carefully pry up the word. Now, I did end up breaking the word. I really wanted to save it, but it was an easy fix, and I did end up using it in another DIY. And then I wanted to try to preserve the paper underneath. It did rip a little bit, but in the end it turned out okay because it kind of just added to my rustic look, so I was okay with it. So where my paper ripped a little bit, I just went ahead and lightly sanded it down because I'm going to be stenciling over this, so I didn't want it to be very bumpy. So after I cleaned up that board a little bit, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and a makeup sponge, and I'm just going to dry brush over this sign, oh, I'm sorry, I took my distressing brush, and I'm just going to dry brush over this sign just to, of course, give it that rustic look. I really loved the paper as it was, but I kind of also wanted to camouflage the rips in it as well. After that, I took these stencils that I got from the Dollar Tree, and by using a makeup sponge and some black acrylic paint, I'm going to stencil on the words Flower Market. After I stenciled on all of my letters, I took some white chalk paint and I dry brushed over my letters so they weren't so bold and black. Now, as you can see, they kind of came out a little messy. So what I decided to do was take my black paint pen and I'm going to outline each one of my letters. And I really do feel that this helped clean it up. Next, I'm going to put my backing back in the frame. After that, it's time to glue some dowel rods on my frame. That way we can attach it to the big crate we made before. But before I do that, I'm just going to dry brush a little bit of that white chalk paint over this entire sign. That way it all blends in nicely. Next, I'm going to take those dowel rods and I'm going to hot glue one on each side of my sign. Next, I'm going to take my baby wipe and dip it in the antique Waverly wax to stain my dowel rods. Once my dowel rods were dry, I'm simply going to hot glue the dowel rods to the back of my crate on the top. Now to give this extra support, I'm going to take my painter tape and I'm going to tape these dowel rods down. And that is it. That completes my little flower market crate display. I love this, and I think I really love it because you can change it out for every season. Easy. I started off with this canvas from the Dollar Tree, and after I took it off of the packaging, I went ahead and used a knife to cut around the staples to get the canvas part off of the wooden frame. After my canvas was removed, I took my sanding block and I sanded down the front just a little bit to make it a little bit more smooth. Then I gave this entire frame a good coat of ivory chalk paint. Once that was dry, I took my chippy brush and dipped it in some Waverly Antique Wax and dry brushed that all over my frame. Now I did make sure to get the inside of the frame and the outside, so I got all edges of this frame. Then to blend it all together, I took some sandpaper and sanded it down. Next, I'm going to take this fish net that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to spread it over my canvas so it covers the entire thing. Then I'm going to cut it down, and by using my staple gun, I'm going to start to staple my net to the back of the frame. Now, this did kind of take a little moving around and, you know, sizing and just trying to figure out how I wanted this to lay. At first I thought I wanted it to be doubled up, so you're going to see me wrap it around the back, but then I do decide that I like it just one layer just like that, so you'll see me cut off some little ends. But once I did figure out how I wanted it to look, it looked so cute. I did also use my hot glue gun to tack some of the string down as well. And then when I kind of had an idea on how I wanted it to lay, that's when I used my staple gun to make it more permanent. This is your friendly reminder that if you're loving what you see so far, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button. Not only does it really help my channel to grow, but it tells YouTube you love my content and want to see more. So smash that thumbs up. Now when you do this, you want to make sure to pull the fish net very tight and taut. That way it lays nicely over your frame and doesn't droop. So this is where I decide I did not want it double layered, so I'm just trimming some of the net off, and then I'm going to staple and hot glue down the little loose pieces. Basically, I'm just working with it until I get it to how I like. There really is no method to this, so I'm just trimming it here and there wherever I see fit. Now, as I was doing this, a little handle started to form right up top. You can see where the string is, so I just kept it there because then that way I can hang this sign. I don't know how that happened. I can't even tell you how to do that. I just noticed that it kind of ended up like that, so I ran with it. So at this point I had the basic layout, how I wanted my fishnet. So now I'm just cleaning it up a little bit. So like I said, I'm just trimming it up and then I'm gluing some little ends down. Basically, I'm making sure that none of the little strings are hanging in the middle of my frame. After I had my fishnet the way I wanted it to look, I started hot gluing little seashells to the bottom left corner of my frame. To complete this, I'm going to take a clothespin, and I had already had this painted white from another DIY, and I'm going to hot glue it to the top of my frame, and now we have a cute picture holder. I loved how this came out, and I thought it was perfect to add a picture of my daughter and her little cousin with their great grandparents from the beach, and I'm going to give it to my grandma and grandpa for them to keep. What do you think? So I picked up this little glass coffee mug from the Dollar Tree, and I'm painting the inside bottom portion with that nutmeg apple barrel paint. And then once that's dry, I'm going to paint the top portion with that mocha apple barrel paint, just like we did with the Frappuccino at the beginning of the video. Now, I can't take credit with this idea. I actually saw this done by Bargain Bethany. She is the queen of making these faux drinks and faux sweets. So you're going to have to check out her channel for even more amazing ideas. Then after all of that was dry, I took this little foam piece and stuck it right in the middle, and it was a perfect fit, so I didn't even have to hot glue it. Next, I took this tube of caulk and I cut a big chunk off the tip, because the wider the tip, the easier this will be. But I basically just squeezed it right into my glass all over the foam to make it look like whipped cream. After that, I sprinkled some cinnamon on top of my faux whipped cream. And that's what it looks like now. And then I took a little piece of that straw that I had from before, and I stuck it in the caulk. Now, I do end up changing that out and adding some cinnamon sticks instead, but you'll see that in the final reveal. Then to add some detail, I cut off a piece of this ribbon and I hot glued it around the center of my mug. Next, I took this little wooden pumpkin that I got from a pack at Dollar Tree, and this has a clothespin on it, so I did have to take the clothespin part off. And originally I was going to paint inside the lines, but then I just decided to paint the whole thing, and I'm using my pumpkin orange paint for the pumpkin part, and then I used that nutmeg for the stem and then some green paint for the leaf. And then I'm going to dry brush some Waverly Antique Wax over my pumpkin and hot glue that to the center of my ribbon. I thought this little pumpkin spice latte came out so cute, and it's definitely going to be the focal point of my tiered tray. I'm going to make a welcome sign. So I had this cabinet door. Actually, I got 2 for 99 cents at a local grocery store. I could not believe it. But the first thing I did was give this 2 really good coats of Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. Next, I took some sandpaper and I sanded the entire thing down. Now, if this is not your style and you just want it purely painted and nice and clean, you can absolutely skip this step. But you know me, I love that rustic look. So I sanded it down as much as I could. Then after that, I cleaned it off. Now, I just want to let you know, I am wearing clothes here. I was just at the pool with my daughter, and then when she fell asleep for a nap, I just ran upstairs and started working on this. So I do have a bathing suit cover on and a bathing suit underneath that. So I do want to let you know I actually do have clothes on. So after I got it all sanded down, I took these stencils that I absolutely love. I got them on Amazon. They will be in the description box below. And I spelled out the word welcome minus the O. For the O, I'm going to be using that little pot that you saw there, and we're going to add some flowers. And then, of course, this set only came with one E, so I put the H at the bottom as a space holder. After I had them all lined up, I took some painter's tape and taped it all down so they wouldn't move on me when I went to paint. After that, I took a little part of a sponge brush and Waverly chalk paint in the color Peacock, and I went ahead and stenciled all of these letters on. Now, I chose this color because, again, I am trying to pull out that teal turquoise color that was in those planters that my mom had picked out. I just want to take a moment and welcome you to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. If you're new here, thank you so much for choosing to join me today. I really hope that you love what you see and that you get some great ideas and are inspired to do some DIYs. If you're returning, thank you so much. I have truly appreciated sharing all of my DIYs with you, and I can't wait to share more. After the top letters were painted on, I went ahead and peeled back the tape and took off the stencils. Then when it came to the bottom, I left the M on, but I took the H off and then replaced that with the E. But I left the M on so I could line up the E underneath it. And then I went ahead and I stenciled that letter on. After that was done, I went ahead and peeled off the rest of the tape and the stencils, and then I just made a few touch-ups where it might have bled through. Next, I took the pot that I was going to use as my O, and by just dry brushing some of that peacock color over it, I thought that I would do this so that way it would bring the whole thing together and also make it cohesive with the letters. So after I did the peacock color, I went over it with some brown antique Waverly wax, and then I went over it with that plaster color on top just to kind of dull it all down. Now, to attach this pot to my sign, I really was trying to think of a different way to do it other than drilling a hole and tying it through or putting a nail in. So what I did was I tied some basic twine around the top underneath that lip, and then I'm also hot gluing it down, that way it doesn't move. Then I'm going to tie a little loop with the ends of the twine. Next, I took a command hook, and by using the super glue and the hot glue, I'm going to glue that down under the C, but I'm going to connect the pot to it so I had my spacing correct, so that way it hung where I wanted it to hang. Now, I made sure to use super glue because this is going to be outside and the sun will melt the hot glue, so you definitely want to use E6000 or something other than just hot glue. Then I threw a little super glue and hot glue underneath the pot itself. That way it didn't really move. Next, I added a little twine bow to the front of my pot, and again, I used the super glue and hot glue. Next, I cut off the rest of the twine that was on top. I'm not really worried about the command hook because after I put these florals in, you're not going to see it at all. So after that, to finish it off, I just threw some floral foam in my pot and just started adding any kind of flowers that I wanted. Now, I did end up switching out the flowers. My mom actually made an arrangement that she liked, and then she put it in, and then I added a little American flag, which you'll see in the photos coming up. And then just to protect all of it, I gave this entire thing a really good coat of Mod Podge. I really love how this came out. It really took me out of my box to use that paint color, but like I said earlier, I really wanted to bring out that teal or turquoise color from my mom's planters, and she loved it and I loved it, and it's a great pop of color on her front porch. What do you think? This next one is so fun. So I took this little shadow box from the Dollar Tree, and after I took off the plastic, I had to use my scraper to pry off the back because it was nailed in. After that, I took some 100% acetone nail polish remover, and I started removing the words at the bottom, Grateful Heart. Now, originally, I was going to remove all of it, and then I realized that the top of it said, Start each day with A, and I got an idea. Now, I knew what I was going to do with this, but that just kind of was an added bonus. After that, I took the back of that frame and I peeled off the little piece that was on there and then scraped off the leftover hot glue. Then I took this piece of scrapbook paper that I got from Hobby Lobby and I traced the back around it and cut it out. Next, just by using some hot glue, I attached the scrapbook paper to the back of the frame. Now I did use my little brayer tool to make sure that it was flat. After that, I took these coffee beans that I got at a local grocery store and I just filled up my frame. And then I took these mini pumpkins that I got out of a pack, and I'll show you in a minute what it looks like. And I put my backing on, but I'm just kind of testing it out, making sure that I kind of have them arranged how I want and have enough of it filled. I don't want the whole thing filled, just kind of the bottom of it, just like that. So once I figured out that I had it exactly how I wanted it, I went ahead and used my hot glue to replace the frame. That pack right there that I just showed you was where those little mini pumpkins came out of, and that did come from the Dollar Tree. After that, I took this decal I made using my Cricut and I put it right at the bottom of my frame. So now it says, "Start each day with this pumpkin spice latte." Now, if you don't have a Cricut, you can always use stickers for this. The Dollar Tree offers a lot of different kinds and colors. So to finish this off, I just took this little latte sticker from this pack of stickers from the Dollar Tree, and it has like a little cat on it or something, and I didn't really like it. So I'm just cutting out this little pumpkin from a different sticker, and I just hot glued that on there instead. And then I'm going to take a darker green marker and color in the top. That way it matches better with the rest of the decor on my frame. But how cute is this little sign? This has got to be one of my favorites, and it smelled really good as I was putting it together too. For my fourth DIY, I'm going to start off with this framed picture from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to remove the plastic and then pull off the foam flower that was on the front. After that, I'm going to take out the back of the photo. Then by using this scrapbook paper, I'm going to Mod Podge it down on the picture. Now you want to make sure to put a nice thin and even layer all over and make sure to get those edges as well. After my paper is adhered down, I take my little knife and I cut around the edges. And then I'm going to go back over it with my sanding block to get any excess paper off and give it that nice clean cut. After that, I'm going to take this USA coloring kit that I also got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to give this a really good coat of white Waverly chalk paint. Once my paint was dry, I took this washi tape and I'm going to tape off a square at the corner of the map, and I bet you know where we're going with this. Then once it's all taped off, I'm going to take my Ocean Waverly chalk paint and I'm going to paint the inside of that square. I'm also going to make sure to get the edges of it as well. Once that was dry, I removed the washi tape and I put it back, but on the inside of the square. Then I'm going to take more washi tape and I'm going to cut off some strips to make the stripes on our flag. Now, because I wanted my first stripe to be red at the top, I went ahead and put a spacer piece there and then started making my little strips underneath that. Now, when I got to the bottom where Texas and Florida are, it was a little harder to put just one full strip of tape down, so I did have to put a couple different strips, which you'll see in 1 second. Then I went ahead and wrapped the tape around the sides. That way I didn't get any paint on those sides either. Now here's when I decide just to cut in the middle of Texas and Florida and just give them their own piece of tape because it just stuck better like that. Then after all of my tape was on and pressed on very well, I went ahead and took my crimson Waverly chalk paint and I painted all of my stripes. After that was dry, I went ahead and I peeled up all of my tape. Now, for some reason, and I always do this, my red stripes are not connecting to the blue, so I just took some paint and I just made some touch-ups. After that, I took my white paint marker and I simply just drew on some stars. After that, I took my sanding block and I sanded the whole thing down really well. Now again, if you do not like the rustic look, you can absolutely skip this step. But you know me, I love the rustic look, so I definitely wanted to sand it down. Then after that, I took my makeup sponge and my Waverly Antique Wax and I went around the edges of the USA, and then I also hit the middle of it as well. I also wanted to distress the frame, so I took my Waverly Antique Wax and I hit the sides of that as well. After that was dry, I replaced the back of the picture into the frame, and then by using 2 tumbling tower blocks, I hot glued those on either side of the map, and then I hot glued that in the middle of my scrapbook paper. After that, I took these rub-on words that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I cut out the word home that is on that sheet. Now I decided to personalize this a little bit, and since I live in Ohio, I took this little heart confetti piece that I had from Valentine's Day and I put it where Ohio would be, and then I took that rub-on word and rubbed it on right underneath the heart. Now to do this, I did use a craft stick and it seemed to work out pretty well. Then I hot glued the heart down, and because the heart is red and the stripe is red, I took my white paint marker and I colored the heart white. Now it's gonna look pink here because somehow I got some red paint on my white paint marker, but I do go back and fix it. Now when I pulled off the transfer, some of my letters did get messed up, so I just took a black permanent marker and made some touch-ups, and after that, this was complete. I love this, but what do you think? Using this welcome summer sign that I got from the Dollar Tree. Now this sign is new this year, so if you see them, pick a bunch of them up because these are perfect to make big signs with. But for today, we're just going to use one of these. The first thing I did was take off this 3D foam welcome, and it was pretty easy to get off. I just started with my scraper and then it peeled right off. Next, I took off the twine hanger and the tag. Then I took my sanding block and sanded the back of the board down. That way it was nice and smooth for me to paint. Make sure to wipe it down when you're done sanding. The next thing I did was take my Waverly chalk paint in white and a chipping brush, and I went ahead and messily, I don't think that's a word, but I gave this a very messy paint job. So as you can see, I wasn't really going for full coverage here because I wanted to give this sign a chipped wood look. After my paint was dry, I took my Waverly Antique Wax and my favorite distressing brush from the Dollar Tree, and I dipped it in the lid, I dabbed it off on a plate, and then I dry brushed over my board with the wax. Now, again, I was not going for full coverage. I was just brushing, paying attention to the edges and the corners, and then also hitting the middle. Then I took the white chipping brush again and kind of brushed over the brown to tone it down. I kept going back and forth between the wax and the white chalk paint to create the look that I wanted. Next, I took this board that was the same length of the board that I'm working on, and I'm going to create the shiplap look. So I put the board down, and then I took a small paintbrush, dipped it into the Waverly Antique Wax, and then I just painted lines going down again to create the shiplap look. Then to blend everything in, I took my sanding block and I sanded it all down. After wiping it off, I took that little paintbrush again and I painted nail holes at the tops of every slat. So I put 2 nail holes in between every slat. And I did this on both ends of my board. Ahead and put my board off to the side to dry, and now I'm pulling these amazing chicken wire signs that I got from Dollar General for $1 each, and I'm going ahead and cutting off the wire hanger carefully, and then I'm going to take off the cowls in the middle of these signs. Now, I didn't have my needle nose pliers with me or like a little screwdriver to get in there, so I just used my scraper to kind of get the staples up, and then I used my wire cutters to pull them out. Now, you want to carefully do this so you don't accidentally rip off the chicken wire, but once I got underneath there and got the staples up, they were really easy to come out. Once those cowls came off, look at this amazing frame that you have left. I went ahead and did this on both. Next, I took 2 of these plastic jars that I got from the Dollar Tree for Valentine's Day. Now, I did see some for Easter too, so they should still have these. And I opened them out of the package and then I peeled the label off. I did this for both. Next, I took some twine and I wrapped it around the top of my jar. Then I wrapped it through the middle of my chicken wire and tied it to the back. I did this for both as well. I did go ahead and double knot it to make sure that it stayed, and then I just put some hot glue at the bottom wherever it was going to touch that chicken wire just to give it some extra support. Now, when you do this, you do want to be careful because as you're about to see on this second one, I pulled it so tight through the chicken wire to tie it that the chicken wire actually came off. Now, I did fix it, but I just wanted to let you know to kind of cautiously tie it. So there's where it came off. All I did was hot glue it back on there and it was fine. I haven't had a problem. But just be careful when you are tying the twine through the chicken wire. Before you tie that second one through there, you're going to want to put it next to the first one to make sure that both of your jars line up. After that, I cut off the remaining twine that was on the back, and then I went ahead and took my hot glue and kind of put some on the back to give it some more extra support. I did this on both as well. After my glue was dried, I took that whiteboard again and I lined both of these up on top. Now, I did have it more towards the bottom, so I left a little space on top. Once I positioned them where I like them, I went ahead and hot glued them down. Next, I took my twine and starting from the back, I hot glued it down and then I wrapped it around and around and around up top until I had the look I was going for. I finished it off by putting some hot glue on the back and then cutting off the remaining twine. Next, I took 2 of these sprays of greenery, and these came from the Dollar Tree and they are my absolute favorite. They look a little frosted and I think that's why I love it, and they had purples, pinks, yellows, so I grabbed a ton because like I said, they're my favorite. And I just went ahead and cut some little pieces off and then just arranged a little floral arrangement in each one of my jars. I tried to use all the pieces from both bushes to make it more full. So this next part, I'm going to give you a few options that you can do. So technically this is optional, but here's some ideas. What I did next was take these black chalkboard little signs that I got from the Dollar Tree and I took off the clothespin on the back. Then I went ahead and hot glued it to the front of each of those jars. Now before I did that, I decided that it needed a bow. So I just took my twine again and I cut a very simple bow and then hot glued it to the twine that was already on my jar. I did this for both. So back to my little chalkboards. I took my white paint marker and I wrote welcome on one of the signs and spring on the other. Now, the reason why I say this is optional is because if you don't do this, then you can actually use these jars to switch out the florals per season. So you can put some sunflowers in there for fall and then maybe some pumpkin picks. You can throw some winter sprigs in there, some Christmas things, and then you can also change it up by using picks, like I said. So you could do hearts on a stick, you could do shamrocks on a stick, you could do eggs on a stick, something like that. So that's why I said that this next part is optional, but it's totally up to you. I absolutely loved how this came out. I think that I might end up taking those chalkboard tags off. That way I can switch it up. But what would you do? What do you think? That I got from actually a local grocery store. They must have had a ton in stock. I got these for 99 cents each. So first I had to head on over to Lowe's and I bought some poplar. Now, these are 6 feet, so I bought 2 that were 6 feet and kept them that length. And then I bought a third one and had my friend here cut it down into 3 equal sections, but I did make sure that they were long enough to go over the top of my piece. So the first thing I did was glue these 2 little doors, or whatever you want to call them, together, and I just used some wood glue to go ahead and glue these together. And then you will see that I do go back and reinforce it, but I did glue them together and then let it dry. So I am making sure that they are even and flush to each other. And then I grabbed a paint stick and I'm going to use some wood glue to glue that down in the middle to give it even more support. Then I'm going to take one of my pieces of poplar and I'm going to glue it to the side of my cabinet. I'm just going to call these cabinet doors, my doors, to my doors. Now, I am so sorry that it's cut off, but I did make sure that it was all even at the bottom. So what ended up happening was this was in frame, and in the next shot, you'll see how my camera tripod had a mind of its own because it just moved on its own. So you'll see that in 1 second. So I kept putting it back in framed and it kept just moving. So after I had those glued on, I'm just going to take the paint sticks again, and I'm going to use that to glue my wood pieces to the doors. See, I'm going to put it into frame, and now it's moving. So please know that at least I tried, but I did not realize it was doing this, obviously. Okay, so then I'm going to go ahead and let this dry, and I am going to put something heavy on top of each one so it adheres down. Being an Italian household, I'm going to put big cans of tomatoes. All right, so next I'm going to move to the top, and this is one of the pieces that my friend at Lowe's cut down. So I'm just going to add some wood glue to the ends there, and then I'm going to slip it right in. And it was a perfect fit. Then I did end up taking 2 smaller pieces and gluing those down as well. So next, to reinforce this, I'm just going to take some screws and I'm going to screw the paint sticks into the wood. And I'm using 3 for each. Now, I thought I would have to do a pilot hole for these, but I ended up not having to because this wood was so soft. So it went right in. And then here's where I say I added the smaller pieces for the top. Then I'm just going to do the same thing, and I'm going to add some screws to reinforce the brackets or the braces on the back of that. So now that my piece is pretty much all structured and put together, I'm going to go ahead and cut down these extra pieces because I do want 2 shelves. And there goes my camera tripod again, just moving away. And it's still moving. I did not realize it until like halfway through this video. So now I'm just using my miter box and saw to go ahead and cut down these pieces so that way they will slip right in just like that and create some shelves. So this is something different than the original piece because hers just had metal rods with the baskets, but I really wanted to add some little shelves just to make it look different and unique. So I did decide to put 1 shelf all the way at the bottom there, right on top of the doors, and then one right in the middle. So now I'm going to take these little rods, curtain rods, that I got from Lowe's, and I bought 2 of them. And then I'm going to take these little brackets. I'm sorry, I didn't catch what the names were, but I can have all this stuff linked in the description box below. And basically, this became a family project because now my mom, dad, and I are trying to figure out how to use this rod to use as the rod. So I hope that makes sense, like what parts of it to use. So what we ended up doing because it was a little long, was we ended up unscrewing the thinner part out from the bigger part. Because like I said, this is a tension rod. So there's like a skinnier rod inside the bigger rod. So my dad right now is just unscrewing and just twisting it so it comes off. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure it down, because now he's going to go cut it down. And I'm not sure what tool he used, something fancy in his garage, but I just measured it. Now before he went and cut it down, he's just going to cut the spiral or the little spring out. And then he's going to take it out to the garage and cut it down. Now, I did want to put that knob that was on the one end that he cut off, I wanted to put it back on. So what he's doing is he's just kind of making it smaller so that that little knob or that little end slips right on. So that's what he did for me. And now I'm just going to slip it right on, push it down, and it's good to go. And now it's a good fit right there. So then I'm just going to put those brackets on. But first, we need to go ahead and stain and distress this big piece. So next, after my wood glue dried, I'm just going to take some sandpaper and a sanding block, and I'm just sanding it down because some of the wood glue did seep through. So I'm going through to make sure it's nice and smooth. Next, I'm going to distress it. So this is my time to get out all my anger or frustration. So I just took a hammer and I'm just banging this piece up. I'm going to use the hammer part, but then I'm going to flip it over and use the other end. And you can see I'm going all the way around, and I'm also going to do it to the two shelves as well. And I really wanted this to be dented, so I really went for it. My arm hurt after this. Then I took this screw, and it's like an old screw, but the threads are really thick. So I love this because it made thread marks in the wood as well. So I just went through and I'm just randomly banging this screw onto random parts of the wood, and I loved the look that this gave. So now you can see all those dents. So now it's time to stain. So I'm going to go in with my dark walnut stain from Minwax and a foam brush, and I'm just going to put a good amount of stain on, and then I'm going to wipe it off with a paper towel. Now you're going to see that my foam brush kept breaking here. It did twice actually. Whoop, there we go again. So I kind of thought that was funny because every time I went to use it, it broke. So now I'm just going to go ahead and wipe it down. Then I'm going to grab a new brush and I'm just going to do the same thing. So it took me a second to kind of get in a good groove of how to do this. So you can see I'm totally just drenching it on there, and then I'm just going to wipe it down. So this was interesting to do because I had to get into all those little grooves, but that's why it really helped to wipe it down, because I did get into those grooves. And I did this for the entire piece. I did the sides and the insides as well. I did not worry about the back because this is gonna be hung on the wall. So this is the first time like doing a major project like this, and I have to say I was really proud of myself. I'm gonna be honest, I never had been to Lowe's by myself to buy something like wood or all of these little pieces. So I'm pretty sure every employee in each department helped me out, but I just was really proud of myself. Because before this, I just stuck to Dollar Tree crafting. But this just goes to show you that anybody can do anything like this. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stain my shelves. So I did realize halfway through staining these shelves, I forgot to distress the side of them, the side that actually is going to be showing. So you're going to see that I pause from the staining for a minute and I start to do that. I'm going to just distress the sides just like I did the entire piece. And after that, I'm just going to finish staining my shelves. And like I said, I am saturating this, and then I'm just going to go through and wipe it down. And I'm just using a paper towel to do that. Some people use an old rag. You absolutely could use that too. All right, so once all my stain was dry, I'm going to take this chalked paint, and it's called Chiffon Cream, and I got this from Walmart, and I'm just going to take a real nice wild chippy brush, and I'm going to dry brush this cream over my stain. So this is going to give it that rustic two-tone look, and I loved the way that this turned out. So as you can see, I'm dipping it in my paint, and then I'm dabbing it on the plate to get the majority of it off. And then I'm just dry brushing right over it. So a good amount of that stain is still showing through. And I did this on the entire piece. Now I did go a little heavier in the corners, so that way it highlighted the corners and the edges. Then you want to make sure to get the middle as well. Then I'm going to take my 80 grit sandpaper and I'm going to sand this entire thing, and this just helps to blend the paint in with the stain. See how nice it's blending in? And then I did, in some areas, push a little harder to bring out the natural wood from underneath, and I loved how that looked. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to sand this entire thing again. Then I'm going to do the dry brushing to my shelves. And then once they're halfway dry, I'm going to go ahead and sand those down as well. I want to tell you that I created this whole piece in one day. So this was so easy to do. And here is the final look at what my distressing looks like. Look at all of those dents. I absolutely love it. And the great thing is you can use whatever stain and whatever paint colors you like. All right, so once that was all complete and dry, it's now time to attach all my pieces. So I'm just going to take some wood glue and I'm going to glue my shelf to the middle. Now you can see that the shelf at the bottom there above, right on top of the doors, I already glued down. I lost the footage of that. I apologize. So now I'm just going through and I'm going to glue this shelf in. And I am using a level to make sure that it is straight. Now I'm going to take these knobs that I have left over from a piece of furniture that I didn't need, and they were wood, so I just spray painted them black, and I'm just using some wood glue to go ahead and glue them on because these aren't working cupboards, they're just for show, so I just went ahead and glued them on. Now I did decide to dry brush over these knobs and sand them down, but I really didn't like how that came out, so I'm going to have to go back and repaint those. But for now, this is how they looked. Okay, so now I'm going to attach my rods. So these are the baskets that I purchased, and I got these on Amazon. They did not come with these S-hooks. The S-hooks I already had. So I'm just kind of laying everything out, making sure that I like how it looks. And there's my mom, and she's going to help me. So basically, she's just going to help me hold it so it doesn't move. And I'm going to take those little brackets. Now, earlier when I showed you, they were copper, but I did go ahead and spray paint all of those black as well. So now I'm just going to use my drill the drill, sorry, my dad's drill. That's where I got hung up on. It's not my drill, it's my dad's drill. And I'm just going to go ahead and drill these in. Now, of course, we measured from the top to the rod to make sure that this was even as well. And we're going to do this for both of my rods. I did decide to do two. I'm going to do two, one at the top and one underneath my first shelf in the middle. Then once that's on, this is complete, and oh my goodness, so amazing. What do you think? I grabbed these two gardening tools that I got from the Dollar Tree. So the first thing I did was, of course, cut off the tags, and then I cut off the foam that's around the handle. This just was not going to fit into my look. Now, I am not a gardener. This is not actually to be used, obviously. This is just for display and decor purposes only. Okay, so I then took that baby wipe again and dipped it in some Waverly Antique Wax, and I stained the bottom of these tools because the light wood just was not going to go, so I needed to darken it up a little bit, but I did this for both. Then to add a little texture in the middle, I took some twine and simply hot glued it in between the top and the bottom of the handle. You can see that there's little grooves there, so that's where I started and that's where I ended. But I just made sure to keep it very tight so the entire middle of the handle was covered with twine. Now, I didn't put hot glue around every single wrap around, if that makes sense, but I just kind of wrapped and wrapped and then put some hot glue and then wrapped and wrapped and wrapped and put more. So I just kind of tacked it down as I went, as I saw fit. But I did this on both tools as well. After my handles were wrapped, I just took my scissors and kind of trimmed up all of the little hairs that were sticking out. Now, I know a lot of people use lighters, but I get a little freaked out with fire. So I just opted for cutting it all off. Then I took that Waverly Antique Wax and my makeup sponge again, and I just dabbed it all over the twine just to kind of give it that rustic look and to darken it up just a little bit. Now, for the tops of the tools, I'm going to show you two different ways that you can do this. And the reason why is because I did it one way and then I saw a different way that after I already did this, so I decided to change it. But here's number one. This is kind of the simpler look if you want to go with this look. So the only thing I did was paint the tops of the tools, the metal parts, with that gray elephant chalk paint from Waverly. So I just painted the entire top and then also that little silver ring that's right above the wood, the handle. And then after that, I added some Waverly Antique wax around the edges of the tops and then kind of in the middle just to add that antique rust look. Okay, so that was the first way to do it. So it was just the gray chalk paint and then some rust. Now, this is the one that I fell in love with and that I had to try. So this one is super easy too. So all you do is you take some Mod Podge and you rub it all over the top of the tool. You make sure that the surface is completely covered. After that's done, you're going to take some ground cinnamon, that's right, I said cinnamon, and you're going to sprinkle it all over the tool. Then you're going to take that Mod Podge again and simply paint over it. Now at first, it's just going to look like you're just pushing all the cinnamon around and it's not doing anything. But the more Mod Podge you add, the more it's going to start to create a paste. And that's when the magic happens. So as you can see there, it's starting to adhere and it's starting to kind of make it bumpy and kind of textured. Then all I did was sprinkle a little bit more cinnamon in random spots and then I dabbed the Mod Podge on top of it, and that seemed to bring out the very primitive, very rustic, very rusty, very antiqued, very old look I was going for. Just all the things. So after the front was done, I went ahead and flipped it over and did the exact same thing to the back. Then after my shovel was complete, I grabbed the other tool and did the exact same thing. I cannot wait to show you how these turned out at the end. So you definitely want to stay tuned. This is so amazing. And I want to thank the Silver Farmhouse on YouTube and Facebook for giving me this amazing idea. Now in this shot, the Mod Podge was still a little wet, but you can see what it's going to look like and how amazing does that look. Then, of course, to give it that final touch, I took that Waverly Antique wax and just kind of rubbed it all over the edges of both of the tools and then around that little silver ring, and that brought it all together. DIY, I'm going to start off with this little scarecrow sign that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to paint each one of the pieces with white chalk paint. Now, you don't have to go for full coverage, just so the majority of it is covered. Now, the middle piece right here had a ton of glitter on it, so I just sanded it off. Then, of course, I used my little ladybug to clean up all the glitter, and then I proceeded to paint the rest of those little pieces. So like I said, you really don't have to make sure that you know, every single, you know, that it's completely covered. Just give it a good go at it, I guess. So after your scarecrow dries, I went ahead and I took off the ribbon on the back, and it's just stapled on, so you can just pull it right off, because we're going to have to deconstruct this a little bit and then put it back together. So now we're going to put it back together. So I just flipped the pieces over, and I am going to put all that middle piece in there too, just to measure the gap in between. But now we have to connect the head and the pants. So to do this, I'm just going to use the craft stick. And if you saw, all the pieces were touching, whereas before, when they were on the ribbon, there were spaces in between, but now I want them to touch. So then I took a longer craft stick and hot glued it right in the middle to kind of look like arms. Next, I'm going to take some Waverly chalk paint in white and just go ahead and paint my craft sticks. Now, you do not have to paint the back of this. You can if you want to, but it's totally up to you. So I'm just going to make sure that my craft sticks are covered. Then I wanted this little thing to stand. Now, I know you're sitting there going, this is really ugly, but don't worry, it'll transform. So to get this to stand, I just hot glued some tumbling tower blocks on the back, but I did see that it was a little wobbly, so I actually stacked another one on each one of the legs. So there's 2 tumbling tower blocks behind each of the legs. And then I realized that it was still a little wobbly, so I did the same thing in the front of the legs. And like I said, this will all be covered. So as you can see, it's not really standing very well. So I am going to go ahead and put some tumbling tower blocks on the front. So I just hot glued one down, and then I'm going to add another one on top of that, and then do the same thing on the other leg. And once I did this, it was okay, but I still didn't trust it. So what I actually ended up doing was hot gluing one in the center of each. Well, you'll see in a second. But first, I did go ahead and paint these ones that I just glued with the white chalk paint. So you can see that it's not gonna work. So I do fix that in 1 second. But first, like I said, I gave this a good coat of white chalk paint. So real quick, I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, thank you so much for choosing to stop by today. I really hope that you love what you see and you stop by on a great day, because we have an amazing collab for you. If you're returning, you already know I love you, I appreciate you, and thank you so much for choosing to come back to my channel. I can't wait to share so much more content with you. All right, to fix the problem of it falling over, like I said, I just went ahead and hot glued one in the middle of those, the 2 in the back and the 2 in the front. That really seemed to do the trick. And then I went ahead and hot glued, and then I went ahead and painted those ones as well. Then after that, I took this satin pillowcase that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to open it up, and then I'm going to slip it over this little structure here. I bet you can tell now what we're going to make. So I just slipped it over, and then I'm going to cut the bottom where it was really, really long. So I just want it to kind of end where the feet end of the scarecrow. So I'm just going to use my fabric scissors, and I tell you what, I love these fabric scissors. I got them from Dollar General for like 10 bucks, and they are great. I loved it. So I didn't exactly cut a straight line on purpose, because you know, like the bottom of ghosts are kind of squiggly. So I didn't worry about cutting it in a straight line. Now at the top, I did fold it over. Now this is the back, and then I'm just going to use my hot glue to go ahead and kind of tighten it a little bit and just bring in the corners there, just to kind of get the shape of the head. So like I said, there we go. I'm just going to hot glue the one corner, and then I'm going to overlap the other corner, and then I'm actually going to hot glue the top down just a little bit, which you'll see. So now I keep kind of positioning it, setting it up to see how I like it. And now this is when I decide I'm just going to go ahead and hot glue these little corners down as well. Because like I said, I am trying to get that shape. There we go. Okay, so after that, I needed some black fabric. So what I ended up doing was I took an old black t-shirt, and I just cut out 2 little eyes and then a mouth, and then I hot glued those on. So to get the eyes to be the same size, I actually folded this little piece in half, and then I went ahead and cut them out, and look, now they're 2 of the same size. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the mouth. And at first I cut it and I realized it was a little too big, so then I cut it down a little bit. But this black t-shirt worked out perfectly fine. Look how funny. See, the mouth was just a little too big. So I'm just giving it a little trim here. And then after all my pieces were cut, I did go ahead and hot glue them down. I used hot glue for this whole project. You can use fabric glue if you want to, but I use Gorilla Glue, and it seems to, be a really strong hold. I love using Gorilla Glue, hot glue. That's all I use. I would definitely recommend it. I do actually have a link in my description box from Amazon for them if you'd like to pick some up. All right, so then I realized that those arms were just a little too high, so I did take our little guy out, and now I'm just going to move that popsicle stick down a little bit. And then I'm going to stick him back in our little sheet. Then that middle part that I painted white, I'm actually going to paint that black now. I changed my mind and I wanted that to be black. So I'm just going to give that a really good coat of black paint. And I am making sure to paint the edges of it as well. Then I'm going to take this little metal spooky sign that I got in a pack from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to give that a coat of white. Now, if some of the metal showed through, that's okay. I actually liked that. So now I'm going to use hot glue and super glue to glue this down on that little black piece. And I am using super glue because hot glue and metal do not mix, so hot glue alone would not stick. So I'm going to flip it over and stick it right in the middle. And then I'm just going to simply take my little ghost and I am going to hot glue this sign onto my pillow there, the pillowcase, the ghost. And I did purposely do it at an angle as well. All right, so then I decided I wanted her to be a girl. So I took this little purple glitter bow that I got from the Dollar Tree, and it did have a little skeleton in the middle, which remember that because you'll see that skeleton in a little bit. But I just decided to, at first I was just going to cut down the tails, and then I just decided to cut them off completely because it was covering her eyes. So I just go ahead and cut off the tails, and look at all that glitter. That's why I keep blowing the ghost, because there's just a ton. And then I went ahead and hot glued it at an angle at the top. And then I took one of these bat rings, cut off the ring part, and hot glued that into the middle of her bow. Look how cute she is. Okay, so then I decided I wanted it to look like she was holding that sign. So I folded the pillowcase in a little bit where like her arms would be holding it. And I really thought that that made this look like legit, like a ghost was holding that sign. So I'm glad I thought to do that because I thought that brought it all together. Then I decided, you know what, this little thing, she needs to light up. So I took some lights from the Dollar Tree, and green ones were the only ones I had. So I just went for the green, and I'm just going to simply flip the little structure scarecrow over, and I'm just going to use some painter's tape and tape the top piece to the back of the head, which you'll see in just a second. And then I'm just simply going to wrap the rest of the lights around that structure going down. So I'm just going to wrap and wrap and wrap, and I am trying to evenly place the lights. Then I'm just going to hot glue the battery pack to that tumbling tower block in the back. And you do want to make sure that you put the screw side up where you would unscrew it. And then all I'm going to do is simply stick that structure back into the pillowcase, and we have this super cute, spooky little girl ghost, and I absolutely love it. I know it's a little weird with the green lights, but that's all I had. But I tell you what, it's kind of cool. I mean, I might switch them out, I'm not sure, but I really loved how this came out and thought it was super, super cute. But you tell me, what do you think? I I have this unfinished wood cupboard door that I actually got at a local grocery store for like 99 cents. They were selling a ton of these. If you caught my thrift flip video, a couple or in the last video, you saw that I had other cupboard doors too. So I'm going to start off by pouring some Waverly Antique Wax into the lid and dipping a baby wipe in it, and I'm going to faux stain the outside of this frame or this door. So I am going to go around the perimeter, and I am going to go on the top. And then I am going to go into some of the little grooves as well. And I am going around all the sides and the edges. Next, I'm going to take my Waverly chalk paint in the color white, and I'm going to paint the inside of this little door. After my paint is dry, I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to draw some lines to make it look like faux shiplap. So I'm going to start right in the middle, and I'm going to draw a line on top and on the bottom by using a sharp pencil. And I'm then going to move my ruler over to make sure the lines go all the way across. And then I'm going to repeat this going up and down, lining up my ruler to the previously drawn line. After all my lines were drawn, I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to smudge each one of the lines to make it even more look like faux shiplap. I've used a lot of different methods to draw on shiplap lines, and this is just my favorite one by far, but you use whatever method works for you. I just really love smudging in the pencil. Next, I'm going to take my sanding sponge and I'm going to sand it down just a little bit to help everything blend in. And then I'm going to take my chunky brush and I'm going to dry brush some of that Waverly Antique Wax all over the white part of this board. Then I'm going to take my sanding sponge and I'm going to sand it down one more time just to help it all blend in. After that, I'm going to put this sign off to the side, and I'm going to grab one of these little truck cutouts that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to prep this by taking out the little hanger on top, and then I'm going to take some Dollar Tree spackling, and I'm just going to cover in those holes because I'm not going to need them. And then I'm going to sand the top down so it's nice and smooth and ready to paint. Next, I'm going to take my apple barrel red paint and I'm just going to give my truck a good paint of that. Now I'm going to paint the truck part and the fenders, but I'm not going to go around the gate on the back or the tires and the hubcaps. Real quick, I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to my YouTube channel. If you're new, I want to thank you so much for choosing to stop by today. I really hope that you love what you see, and hey, stick around with me for a while by hitting that subscribe button. If you're returning, you already know I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming back. I do read all of your comments, so please keep those coming, and thank you so much for all of your support. Now for the little gate part for the bed of the truck, I'm going to go ahead and faux stain that. And to do this, I'm going to, again, take my baby wipe and dip it in the Waverly Antique Wax and just rub it on. Then I did decide to lightly go in between those two wood pieces as well. That way it just fills it in. For the tires, I'm going to take some black paint and I'm going to go ahead and kind of finish off the rounded part at the top and then paint around that 3D part, which is supposed to be, I assume, the hubcap. And I'm going to do that to, obviously, both tires. Next, I'm going to take this silver metallic paint that I picked up from Walmart, and I'm going to paint the hubcaps, and then I'm going to paint right underneath the fender part above the tire too. And again, I'm going to do this on both. Next, I'm going to take a little sponge and I'm going to dip it in some white Waverly chalk paint. And I'm just going to dab, dab, dab all over my truck to make it look like snow. I really thought that adding this little touch brought this truck to life, and I really love adding the faux snow look to everything except, to be completely honest, I really hate snow. Let me know down in the comments, are you a snow person? If you live in an area that gets snow, do you like the snow, or is it just good for Christmas Day and then it should be done? Because that's what I feel like. After that, I'm going to take this little garland tie and I'm going to make it into a wreath. So I'm just going to wrap it around itself. And then I'm simply going to hot glue that to the side of my truck. And I am going to make sure that it is completely glued down. So I'm going to use a generous amount of glue. And then I'm going to take that sponge again and I'm going to faux flock my wreath. Next, I'm going to hot glue some little red berries all around my wreath. And these are just some random red berries I had left over from a Christmas pick. Next, I'm going to take one of these little trees that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to take the biggest out of the two. I'm going to unscrew the bottom little base, and then I'm going to actually trim this down so that way it lays flat up against the truck. So I'm just going to give this a little haircut by using my scissors. Now I'm just kind of positioning it where I want it. And then I'm going to use, again, a generous amount of hot glue. And I'm going to hot glue my tree to the back of my truck. So that way it's kind of sticking out from the bed of the truck as well. Now you do want to apply a lot of glue and a lot of pressure so that way it sticks to the wood piece. Now I'm going to take my little ladybug and I'm going to clean up my little tree mess. And then I'm going to take this little raffia bow that I had left over from something else, and I'm going to hot glue it to the top of my wreath just to give it extra detail. Next, I'm going to take some extra cardboard and I'm going to start cutting out little squares and rectangles. Now, if this is not making sense to you, don't worry, you'll catch on in just a little bit. So after I had my little pieces cut out, I'm going to go ahead and hot glue them to the bed of the truck behind the piece of wood. Now, I did go ahead and trim down the tree where I saw that it was necessary. That way I can fit all of my little cardboard pieces on. And I'm going to have 4 altogether, although you might need more or less. Once all of my boxes were glued down, I'm going to write on one box, Mommy Stuff. Then on another box, I'm going to write Daddy Stuff. Then on the third box, I'm going to write Amelia. And then on the fourth box, I'm going to write Romeo, which is a dog's name. After that, I'm going to take my truck, and before I hot glue it down to my sign, I have to build it up a little bit because all that, the trees and the boxes that I glued on there made it uneven, so I needed to even it out. So I'm just adding extra pieces of cardboard to the back, and now I'm going to hot glue this down, and I did make it so the wheels touched the bottom. Now I'm going to put that aside and I'm going to grab some wood letters to spell out home, and I'm going to paint those in the red paint from Apple Barrel. Next, I'm going to arrange all of my wording on my board, and I did cut out the will be for Christmas on my Cricut, but you can use sticker letters or stencils, whatever you have. And I'm just going to go ahead and apply my vinyl decal down. And then for the home, I'm going to go ahead and use this 3D pop-up tape, and I'm just going to cut off little strips, and I'm going to tape them down to the back of each one of these letters. Now they are self-adhesive, so I'm just using that to apply to the back of the letters. Once all my tape is applied, I'm going to hot glue these down. Now, again, they are self-adhesive. You could just remove the little paper on the back, but I just wanted it to be more secure, so I'm adding some hot glue. Next, I'm going to take that sponge again, dip it in some white paint, and I'm just going to add that little snowy effect to the top of my home word. Then I decided to go ahead and lightly brush over the black wording as well to kind of dull that down a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and add some snow to the top of the cardboard. I bet you can guess what our big announcement is. If you think you know, go ahead and comment a Christmas tree down below. Then to go ahead and top this off, I'm going to use my spray adhesive and spray it all over my truck, and then add some sparkly white glitter. I think that adding this glitter made this sign look so fun and so festive, and even though it has that rustic look, it has that little touch of Christmas as well. And after my glitter was all applied, I simply just used my hairdryer to go ahead and kind of just brush off the rust of the excess glitter that was on there. And after that, this little sign was complete. I absolutely love how this came out. All right, well, there you have it. The top 21 DIYs of 2021. I want to thank you so much if you stuck around with me for this entire video. I could not have been so successful this past year without all of you. I am wishing everybody a very happy new year, and I cannot wait to share even more new and exciting content in 2022. But make sure that you are subscribed to my channel and have your notifications turned on so you will be notified when I upload all of that fun and exciting content. Until I see you again, I'll craft with you soon. Bye!